Imagine receiving a letter written by Pontius Pilate, the man who condemned Jesus to crucifixion, describing in detail the Nazarene's appearance, his miracles, and even his resurrection. Yes, this letter exists. Pilate narrates events so astonishing that even the Gospels don't mention them. In this video, you will discover what really happened during Jesus' trial, the supernatural signs that accompanied his death, and the mystery of the empty tomb. So, leave a like, because what comes next will deeply move you. Stay until the end and dive into this unique historical and spiritual account. Introduction of Pilate and his encounter with Jesus. Pontius Pilate, governor of the Roman province of Judea, was sent to Jerusalem with the difficult task of maintaining order in one of the empire's most challenging regions. From the start, his mission proved to be a daunting one, as Jerusalem was a center of religious fervor and a city marked by political conflicts. Pilate, as Rome's representative, was accustomed to dealing with rebellions, conspiracies, and all kinds of social tension. However, what he did not expect was to encounter a figure like Jesus of Nazareth. Pilate's arrival in Jerusalem was marked by constant tensions with the Jewish leaders. These priests and Pharisees, who controlled the city's religious life, were distrustful of Pilate, who represented Roman oppression. The relationship between Pilate and these leaders was never easy, and there was an underlying competition for power and influence over the people. In this setting, Jesus' figure began to gain notoriety, which soon caught the governor's attention. Upon first hearing about Jesus, Pilate was intrigued. Jesus was unlike the religious leaders he knew, full of pomp and eloquent speeches. On the contrary, the Nazarene spoke of love, forgiveness, and a spiritual kingdom. This type of message contrasted with the earthly ambitions of the Jewish leaders, and in some ways with Roman politics itself, which was based on power and force. At first, Pilate thought that Jesus might be just another agitator inciting the people to revolt, but the more he heard about him, the more curious he became. Pilate sent his secretary Manlius to closely observe Jesus' teachings and bring back detailed information. Manlius reported that Jesus not only spoke of love and forgiveness, but also encouraged respect for authorities. Jesus' famous phrase, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's," was a turning point in Pilate's opinion. Upon hearing this, Pilate concluded that Jesus did not pose a direct political threat to the empire. When Jesus was brought before Pilate for the first time, the governor felt something strange. In his letter to Tiberius, Pilate described a deep feeling of respect and awe in Jesus' presence. The calm and serenity of Jesus in such a tense situation contrasted with everything Pilate had seen in his political career. Accustomed to dealing with kings, governors, and military leaders, Pilate had never encountered someone like Jesus. Even without words, the Nazarene's presence made it clear that he was no ordinary man. Jesus' demeanor was something Pilate had never experienced. While other political and religious leaders either bowed or displayed aggression, Jesus remained calm, almost as if he knew something greater was happening. Pilate, a man used to resolving conflicts with force, found himself at a loss. He realized that he was facing something far more complex than a simple political trial. The pressure from the religious leaders to condemn Jesus was mounting, and Pilate felt increasingly torn. He knew that the Sanhedrin had its own interests in getting rid of Jesus, and this bothered him. The idea of condemning an innocent man deeply troubled him, but at the same time, he feared a revolt if he went against the Jewish leaders. The responsibility of maintaining peace in Jerusalem weighed heavily on his shoulders, and any mistake could result in a political catastrophe. Pilate made several attempts to avoid condemning Jesus. He sent Jesus to Herod in an attempt to transfer the responsibility to another ruler. But Herod did not want to get involved and returned Jesus to Pilate. With each passing moment, the governor saw his room to maneuver shrinking. Even his wife, who was said to have had a disturbing dream about Jesus, advised Pilate not to condemn him. The situation worsened when the crowd, incited by the religious leaders, began demanding Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate offered them the choice to release either Jesus or Barabbas, a criminal, but the people's choice was clear. Pilate found himself in a profound moral dilemma, knowing that he was about to condemn a righteous man. However, political pressure prevailed, and he made the fateful decision. In the end, Pilate tried to distance himself from the decision by symbolically washing his hands in front of the crowd. However, deep down, he knew that this moment would mark him forever. In his letter, Pilate reveals the discomfort and guilt he felt as he was aware that Jesus' trial transcended political and earthly matters. He had condemned a man to death who seemed destined for something much greater. Physical appearance of Jesus. According to Pilate. In the famous letter from Pontius Pilate to Emperor Tiberius, the Roman governor provides one of the most detailed descriptions of the appearance of Jesus of Nazareth. Although the Gospels do not offer much information about Jesus' physical features, Pilate took the time to depict the impact the Nazarene's presence had on him. For Pilate, Jesus' appearance was not imposing in the conventional sense, but there was something about his posture and aura that made him unmistakable. Pilate described Jesus as being of average height, with an upright and dignified posture. Although he was not physically imposing, his presence alone drew attention. He did not need to raise his voice or wear ornaments to command respect. Jesus' serenity was his greatest strength, and his calmness impressed all who approached him, including Pilate himself. Jesus' face was one of the features that most impressed the governor. Pilate recounts that Jesus' expression was both kind and firm at the same time. His facial features were harmonious and perfect, radiating a sense of peace. He describes Jesus' eyes as deep, capable of penetrating the soul of anyone who looked into them. There was something in Jesus' eyes that transcended the physical world, as if he could see beyond appearances and circumstances. Pilate mentions that Jesus' eyes varied in color depending on the light. Some accounts say his eyes were light brown, while others mention a blue hue. Regardless of the exact color, it was the depth of his gaze that made the most impact. His eyes were filled with wisdom, as if he knew things others could not comprehend. This quality made many who approached Jesus feel a nearly involuntary reverence. Jesus' hair also caught Pilate's attention. He describes it as long, wavy, and of a tone between light brown and blonde. His hair fell harmoniously over his shoulders, contrasting with the appearance of people in the region, who generally had thicker, darker hair. This subtle physical contrast added to the sense that Jesus was different from those around him. In addition to his hair, Jesus' beard is described as full and well-groomed. In the ancient world, a beard was a symbol of wisdom and respect, and Jesus' beard was no exception. His beard completed the image of a mature and dignified man, someone whose appearance reflected his deep spiritual connection. To Pilate, Jesus' beard further reinforced his natural authority and calmness. Pilate also observed Jesus' skin. Despite spending much time outdoors preaching and walking long distances, his skin was described as fair and well cared for, yet not fragile. It was the skin of someone who, though exposed to the elements, maintained an inner vitality. For Pilate, Jesus' apparent health was a reflection of his spiritual purity, something he had never seen in another man. Pilate also highlighted Jesus' clothing. Unlike the religious leaders who wore elaborate robes to display status, Jesus dressed simply. He wore a long tunic and cloak, without adornments or jewelry. The simplicity of his clothes contrasted with the majesty of his presence. It was as though his spiritual authority needed no external symbols of power. Jesus' aura of serenity was one of the aspects most mentioned by Pilate. Even amid tensions and confrontations, Jesus remained calm, as if he were always at peace with himself and the world around him. This quality impressed Pilate, a man accustomed to the brutality of politics and the thirst for power. Jesus' presence, on the other hand, was not violent or forced, but natural, as though he carried within him an invisible strength. Finally, Pilate compared Jesus to a statue of the Greek and Roman gods, but with one essential difference. While statues represented an ideal of physical beauty, Jesus embodied this ideal in living form, blending physical beauty with unmatched spiritual purity. No artist, according to Pilate, could capture Jesus' true essence, for his majesty went far beyond what human hands could represent. Wisdom and teachings of Jesus. The wisdom of Jesus of Nazareth left Pontius Pilate deeply impressed. As a man educated in the philosophical traditions of Greece and Rome, Pilate was accustomed to dealing with great orators and thinkers, but nothing he had known compared to the clarity and depth with which Jesus conveyed his teachings. In his letter to Tiberius, Pilate mentions that he had never encountered anyone with such serenity and practical wisdom. While the religious leaders of the time, such as the Pharisees and Sadducees, used the law to maintain their authority, Jesus spoke with simplicity, reaching common people with profound spiritual truths. He avoided the traps of complex rhetoric, preferring accessible language, which allowed him to connect with both the humble and the learned. This practical and direct approach was something Pilate admired in Jesus, as he saw it as genuine wisdom. Jesus' response to the question about paying taxes is a clear example of his sharpness. When confronted about loyalty to Caesar, Jesus replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." Pilate recognized that this response was brilliant, as Jesus managed to avoid a direct political conflict while reinforcing the idea that his kingdom was spiritual and not of this world. To Pilate, this was proof that Jesus was a master at navigating the traps set by the powerful. Another aspect of Jesus' wisdom that caught Pilate's attention was his ability to touch people's hearts. Jesus did not limit himself to teaching abstract theories or complex laws. He spoke about love for one's neighbor, compassion, and forgiveness. These universal values transcended the cultural and religious boundaries of the time, and Pilate realized that this was what made Jesus so popular among the masses. People saw in him not just a teacher, but a spiritual guide. Jesus was also bold in confronting the hypocrisy of the religious leaders. He did not hesitate to openly criticize the Pharisees and Sadducees, calling them whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside but full of corruption on the inside. This frankness was one of the reasons the religious leaders hated him, but also why the people loved him. Pilate understood that Jesus was not seeking to please the powerful, but rather to speak the truth, regardless of the consequences. In addition to his courage, Jesus demonstrated practical wisdom in dealing with social issues. He approached the marginalized, the poor, and sinners, showing that a person's true worth lay in their heart, not in their social status or wealth. To Pilate, this stance was revolutionary, as it contrasted with the norms of both Jewish and Roman society, which valued status and wealth as signs of divine favor. Pilate was particularly impressed by Jesus' serenity in the face of his enemies. Even when confronted with unjust accusations and hatred, Jesus maintained a calm and confident demeanor. He never retaliated or defended himself with violence, something Pilate, a man accustomed to the brutality of politics, found almost impossible to understand. Jesus' ability to remain unshaken was a testament to his deep spiritual connection. Another point Pilate admired was Jesus' humility. Unlike the leaders of his time, Jesus did not seek personal glory. He did not use his popularity to gain power or wealth, but rather to help others and teach about God's love. This humility was rare in a world where personal ambition was often the driving force behind great leaders. Pilate saw this as proof that Jesus was guided by something greater than earthly ambitions. Jesus also had a unique ability to communicate deep truths through parables. By telling simple stories, he revealed complex truths about human nature, the kingdom of God, and the relationship between man and the divine. These parables were so powerful that even Pilate, who was not a Jew, could see the wisdom in them. He recognized that Jesus had a rare gift for teaching in a way that anyone could understand. Finally, Pilate saw in Jesus a man who was beyond the interests of this world. His focus was not on politics or power, but on something deeper and eternal. This spiritual conviction was something that Pilate, despite his skepticism, deeply respected. He knew that he was in the presence of someone whose impact would go beyond Judea and even beyond the Roman Empire. To Pilate, Jesus was an enigma, a man of such elevated wisdom that he defied the norms of the world he lived in. The trial of Jesus. The trial of Jesus was one of the most complex and tense events Pontius Pilate had to deal with during his tenure as governor of Judea. From the outset, Pilate knew he was not handling an ordinary case. The Jewish leaders were determined to condemn Jesus, and the pressure on the governor increased with every moment. However, Pilate did not see Jesus as a criminal, which placed him in a moral and political dilemma. The religious leaders brought Jesus to Pilate with the accusation that he claimed to be the King of the Jews, a threat to Roman authority. Pilate, however, quickly realized that the charges were more religious than political. To him, Jesus did not seem interested in taking Caesar's throne or starting a rebellion. His message was spiritual, not political, which made the accusations weak in Pilate's eyes. In an attempt to avoid the responsibility of condemning Jesus, Pilate sent the Nazarene to be judged by Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee, since Jesus was from Nazareth. Herod, curious to see Jesus, hoped he would perform a miracle, but when Jesus remained silent and did not answer his questions, Herod sent him back to Pilate. This frustrated Pilate's efforts to rid himself of the case. Back at the Praetorium, Pilate tried to release Jesus by offering the people a choice: to free Jesus or Barabbas, a dangerous criminal imprisoned for murder and sedition. Pilate was convinced that the crowd would choose to release Jesus, but to his surprise, the crowd, incited by the religious leaders, called for Barabbas's release and demanded Jesus' crucifixion. The pressure on Pilate mounted with each passing moment. He knew that Jesus was innocent of the charges of treason and rebellion, but the potential for a popular revolt made him hesitate to release him. Jerusalem was a volatile city, and Pilate knew that any miscalculation could lead to riots, risking his position as governor and his reputation before Emperor Tiberius. Pilate attempted to appeal to the crowd's sense of justice by ordering Jesus to be scourged. The Roman flogging was brutal, and Pilate believed that by presenting Jesus bloodied and weakened, the crowd would ask for his release. However, the plan backfired. Instead of showing sympathy, the religious leaders and the crowd continued to demand Jesus' crucifixion, shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Facing increasing pressure, Pilate made a decision that would be remembered throughout history. He publicly washed his hands, symbolizing that he did not take responsibility for Jesus' death. Pilate declared that he found no guilt in Jesus, but to prevent a revolt, he yielded to the will of the people and ordered Jesus' crucifixion. In his letter to Tiberius, Pilate recounts that, at that moment, he felt deeply disturbed, knowing that he was condemning an innocent man. The trial of Jesus was marked by several irregularities, both from the perspective of Jewish and Roman law. The Sanhedrin, which should have conducted a fair trial, was clearly motivated by hatred and envy. According to Jewish law, a death sentence could not be carried out during Passover, and Jesus should have had a full opportunity to defend himself, which did not happen. At the end of the trial, Pilate knew he had been manipulated by the religious leaders and the crowd. He had been unable to find a solution that would preserve his moral integrity while avoiding a revolt. The decision to condemn Jesus haunted him, and he knew that this trial would change history. Pilate was aware that, in some way, Jesus' death was more than just a political event. There was something supernatural happening, something he could not fully understand. Crucifixion and the supernatural signs. The crucifixion of Jesus was an event marked by supernatural phenomena that left Pilate and all who witnessed it profoundly impacted. After condemning Jesus to crucifixion, Pilate observed the events unfolding at Golgotha from a distance. What began as a standard execution soon turned into something much deeper and more terrifying, with signs that seemed to defy the natural order of the world. The first of these signs was the sudden darkness that fell upon the land. At the 6th hour of the day, the sky inexplicably darkened. This was no ordinary eclipse, as the darkness was thick and spread across the entire region. The crowd, which had been fervent up until that point, fell silent, gripped by an inexplicable fear. Pilate, in his letter, mentions that this darkness seemed to herald the arrival of something extraordinary. As Jesus suffered on the cross, the tension in the air was palpable. The darkness persisted until the 9th hour, when Jesus uttered his final words, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." After saying this, he bowed his head and died. At that moment, the earth began to shake violently. An earthquake struck Jerusalem, splitting rocks and causing smaller buildings to collapse. Even the temple, the center of Jewish religious life, was shaken, and its veil, which separated the Holy of Holies, was torn from top to bottom. These supernatural phenomena did not go unnoticed. Even the Roman soldiers, hardened by years of war and executions, were terrified. The centurion in charge of the crucifixion, upon seeing the darkness and the earthquake, exclaimed, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." This testimony, coming from a Roman soldier, was a confirmation of the extraordinary nature of the events taking place. For many in Jerusalem, these signs were interpreted as divine judgment. The fact that the temple's veil tore at the moment of Jesus' death was especially significant. The veil separated the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, where only the high priest could enter once a year. The tearing of the veil symbolized that something had changed in the relationship between God and humanity, and many saw it as a sign that Jesus' sacrifice had indeed broken this barrier. In his letter, Pilate mentions that he felt a strange unease at the moment of Jesus' death. He was not a religious man, but the supernatural signs accompanying the crucifixion made him question if something greater was at play. The earthquake and the darkness deeply disturbed him, and he realized that Jesus' execution was not a common event, but a turning point in history. The crowd, which had previously clamored for Jesus' death, was now silent. Many began to murmur, regretting what they had done. The people of Jerusalem, who had witnessed the crucifixion, felt a sense of mourning and terror. The fear that Jesus' death had brought divine wrath spread quickly, and many left the scene deeply shaken. Beyond the celestial signs, Jesus' death triggered a psychological reaction among those who had condemned him. The religious leaders, who had been confident in their plan to eliminate Jesus, were now restless. Pilate heard reports that some priests began to doubt their decision, fearing they had made a terrible mistake by condemning an innocent man. The crucifixion of Jesus also impacted the spiritual atmosphere of the city. The earthquake and the darkness were not the only signs. Reports of the resurrection of dead saints began to circulate. It was said that tombs opened and that many holy men who had died were seen walking through the city. These events only heightened the sense that something cosmic was underway, something that transcended politics and earthly concerns. By the end of the day, when Jesus' body was taken down from the cross and handed over to Joseph of Arimathea for burial, Pilate knew that he had witnessed an event that would change history forever. The supernatural signs surrounding Jesus' death were undeniable, and even the governor who had condemned him felt that something beyond human understanding had occurred that day. Jesus' crucifixion was not merely an execution, it was the fulfillment of a divine destiny. The resurrection and the mystery of the empty tomb. After the crucifixion, the body of Jesus was placed in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, a secret follower of Jesus. The tomb was sealed with a large stone and guarded by Roman soldiers at the request of the religious leaders. They feared that Jesus' disciples might try to steal the body and proclaim that he had risen, as Jesus himself had predicted. Pilate, wanting to avoid further unrest, agreed to have the tomb guarded. On the morning of the third day, something extraordinary occurred. In Pilate's letter to Tiberius, he describes the events in detail, suggesting a miraculous occurrence. According to both Roman and Jewish guards, a great earthquake struck at dawn, and a bright light, like lightning, descended upon the tomb. The guards, trained to fear nothing, were terrified and fainted at the sight. When they regained consciousness, the body of Jesus was gone. The guards, in panic, ran to report the incident to Pilate. They stated that there was no natural explanation for the body's disappearance. The stone sealing the tomb had been moved by an invisible force, and the light they witnessed was beyond their comprehension. Pilate was perplexed. He knew that if the guards had failed in their duty, they would have been executed, so their words seemed sincere. Upon hearing what had happened, the religious leaders panicked. They quickly tried to bribe the guards, urging them to claim that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body while they were asleep. However, many of the Roman soldiers refused the bribe, insisting that what they had witnessed was supernatural and that Jesus had indeed risen. This account began to spread throughout the city, and the news of the empty tomb quickly circulated. The resurrection of Jesus was the culmination of his life and ministry. For his followers, the empty tomb was confirmation that he truly was the Son of God, just as he had proclaimed. Appearances of Jesus began shortly after the event, first to the women who had come to the tomb, then to his disciples. These appearances further strengthened the faith of his followers, who were now convinced that Jesus had triumphed over death. When Pilate heard reports of Jesus' appearances, he became even more unsettled. He had tried to wash his hands of responsibility, but now he saw that the events were unfolding in ways he could not control. The followers of Jesus, who had been scattered and afraid, were now more united than ever, proclaiming his resurrection with unwavering conviction. The city of Jerusalem was thrown into turmoil. While the religious leaders desperately tried to suppress the story, more and more people began to believe that Jesus had indeed risen from the dead. The disciples, who had once been in hiding, now walked openly, proclaiming the resurrection and converting new followers every day. The faith in Jesus, which had seemed crushed by his death, was now more alive than ever. For Pilate, the resurrection of Jesus remained an unsolvable mystery. He knew he was dealing with something far beyond the usual political and religious issues he was accustomed to facing. The supernatural signs, the disappearance of the body, and the reports of the resurrection all pointed to something divine, something that, despite all his power, Pilate could neither understand nor control. Pilate concludes his letter to Tiberius by stating that although he had fulfilled his duty as governor, he felt he had witnessed the beginning of something far greater. The crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus to him were not isolated events but the start of a new era. The empty tomb became a symbol of a profound shift in the course of human history, something that even the power of Rome could not stop. As time passed, the story of Jesus spread beyond the borders of Judea, reaching the Roman Empire and the world. The resurrection of Jesus, documented by his followers and witnessed by many, became the foundation of the Christian faith. Pilate, though not a believer himself, recognized that the death of one man in Jerusalem had forever changed the course of human history.